OK, donc merci à tous et à toutes d'être ici aujourd'hui avec nous pour cette conférence de presse conjointe avec la ministre Joly et la ministre Baerbock. Aujourd'hui, nous allons commencer avec des brèves remarques de chacune des ministres et ensuite, nous allons inviter les médias à poser des questions. Une question et une question suivie par média, s'il vous plaît. S'il vous plaît, quand vous posez votre question, identifiez-vous le nom de votre média ainsi qu'à qui est adressée votre question. We'll be taking, after the brief remarks, one question and one follow-up question per media. Please, when you ask your questions, identify yourselves, your media, as well as to whom your question is addressed. Madame Joly, à vous la parole.
Merci, Adrien. Bonjour à tous, ça me fait plaisir de vous voir. Merci, Michel, de nous recevoir à la Chambre de commerce. Plaisir de voir aussi le sénateur Baum, qui est avec nous. Mais bien entendu, bienvenue à notre invité très spécial, notre amie, mon amie, Annalena Baerbock, ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Allemagne. Annalena, ça me fait vraiment plaisir de te recevoir chez nous à la maison à Montréal. Le Canada et l'Allemagne, on le sait, entretiennent des relations étroites et de longue date, que ce soit pour défendre la démocratie, que ce soit pour encourager l'innovation au sein de nos économies ou encore pour lutter contre les changements climatiques. Et nous avons aussi appuyé l'Ukraine dans sa lutte pour la liberté. Le Canada l'a fait certainement en imposant des sanctions très fortes, 1600 sanctions qui ont été imposées contre le président Poutine lui-même, ses complices, ces oligarques russes, de sorte qu'ils n'ont aucun moyen de se cacher. Et nos sanctions visent ceux et celles qui permettent l'invasion illégale de l'Ukraine, qui commettent des atrocités telles que celles qu'on a vues à Butcha et à Irpin, ou encore qui répandent de la désinformation pour justifier des actes inhumains. Et nous avons également fourni, dans le contexte de notre aide à l'Ukraine, plus de 620 millions d'aides militaires. Nous avons isolé la Russie politiquement, diplomatiquement et économiquement, et nous l'avons fait en étroite collaboration avec nos partenaires du G7, et nous allons continuer à le faire. Et ensemble, pour les prochaines étapes, nous allons continuer à lutter contre la désinformation. Nous allons exiger des comptes du régime russe pour les crimes de guerre, les crimes contre l'humanité, également la violence sexuelle, devant la Cour internationale de justice et également le Tribunal pénal international. Et nous allons atténuer les impacts globaux de la guerre. So from Montreal to Berlin, to Johannesburg, to Jakarta, we're all feeling the impacts of President Putin's war of choice. Canadians have seen their gas and grocery bills increase. We know that. Inflation is a real issue. And abroad, the situation is dire. While the first shipment of Ukraine grain is headed to Lebanon, we also know that President Putin is putting more than 40 million people at risk of famine. This morning, Minister Baerbock, Annalena, and I visited the Viterra grain terminal at the Port of Montreal nearby, a key stop on Canadian grain's journey to the rest of the world. It is a reminder also of Canada's ability and willingness to be part of the solution to global hunger. Canada has increased this year our domestic grain production by 30%, which is also 30% for all grains, 7% for wheat only. We are sending mobile grain silos in Ukraine so that way we don't lose the production, and we're also sending grain inspectors. We're sending ships to get the grain where it is needed, and we're increasing our donation to the World Food Program. Annalena and I, Minister Baerbock and I spoke this morning about Germany's work to transition away from Russian oil and gas. We will work with them, with Germany, on their green transition and to improve their energy security, including looking at how Canadian energy can play a role. And today, I'm optimistic about the path forward, and with friends like Germany, I am sure that we can translate our will to tackle the challenges that lie ahead into meaningful change. Thank you so much. Merci.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, chère Mélanie, dear ladies and gentlemen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Liebe Melanie, liebe Frau Ministerin, nachdem du in den vergangenen Monaten schon so häufig zu ganz verschiedenen Anlässen in Europa warst, freue ich mich heute endlich, muss ich an dieser Stelle sagen, in Kanada und insbesondere in deiner Heimatstadt Montreal zu Besuch zu sein. Unsere bisherigen Treffen im Rahmen der G7, der NATO, der Vereinten Nationen waren in Liverpool, in Brüssel, in New York, in Berlin, in München und in Madrid und machen deutlich, wie wichtig es ist, dass ich als deutsche Außenministerin endlich auch hier vor Ort sein kann. I think there's no translation. So maybe I just repeat in English what I just said, and then the translation is working. So in short, Mel, thanks a lot that I finally can be here. You have been a dozen times already in Europe, and I'm really happy that I finally can come to see you, not only as a friend, but also especially as a foreign minister in your hometown, Montreal. We have met at different occasions in Europe, within G7, within NATO, within the United Nations, obviously in New York, but we met especially in Liverpool, in Brussels, in Munich, in Berlin, in Madrid, and finally here also in Canada to discuss the very difficult time we are facing currently. So did we fix the German translation? Because otherwise it's hard to use in German media.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's working? Okay, yes. Okay.
So I would like to say thanks a lot. Ich möchte gerne Danke sagen, denn es ist eben keine Selbstverständlichkeit, dass du als kanadische Außenministerin so viel in Europa warst. Und es ist auch keine Selbstverständlichkeit, dass wir so schnell, so eng und vor allen Dingen so vertrauensvoll zusammengearbeitet haben. Das hat natürlich damit zu tun, dass wir uns viel gesehen haben, aber Außenpolitik, Diplomatie hat auch immer eine persönliche Komponente. Und ich glaube, es hat auch damit zu tun, dass wir uns persönlich sehr gut verstehen. Und eigentlich warst du die erste Außenministerin, der ich bei dem G7-Treffen in Liverpool über den Weg gelaufen bin. Zum anderen, und das ist wichtig, weil Außenpolitik ja nicht nur von persönlichen Kontakten lebt, sondern von guten Beziehungen zwischen Ländern. Und darauf können unsere beiden Länder, darauf können wir als Außenministerin auf jahrzehntelange gute Zusammenarbeit aufbauen. Und das gilt in diesen Tagen umso mehr, weil wir auch inhaltlich nicht nur Überschneidungen haben, sondern inhaltlich die gleichen Werte teilen und für uns ähnliche Themen wichtig sind. Die Beziehungen zwischen Kanada und Deutschland sind hervorragend. Das gilt nicht nur für die politische Ebene, sondern gerade auch für die Zivilgesellschaft. Und es gilt vor allen Dingen für den wichtigen Bereich Wissenschaft und Technologie. Bei Themen wie künstlicher Intelligenz, Quantum Computing und natürlich Umwelt- und Klimaschutz arbeiten wir mit euch eng zusammen, tauschen uns aus, lernen voneinander. Und wir haben auch von euch gelernt, wie einfach es sein kann, eine Feminist Foreign Policy einfach zu machen und nicht lange drüber zu reden. Insbesondere sind wir natürlich, das hat unser gemeinsamer Besuch im Hafen gerade gezeigt, im Bereich der Wirtschaft und des Handels eng miteinander verbunden. Knapp 700 deutsche Unternehmen sind hier in Kanada vertreten und diese Wirtschaftsbeziehungen basieren darauf, dass wir eben nicht nur wirtschaftliche Interessen teilen durch Import und Export, sondern dass wir vor allen Dingen Werte und Ziele und damit auch gemeinsame Interessen teilen. Das ist in dieser Zeit wichtiger denn je, denn eine gute gemeinsame Handelspolitik kann eben auch weltweit Werte und Standards fördern. Zum Beispiel, wenn es um Lieferketten geht, wenn es um Fragen von Umwelt- und Klimaschutz geht, aber eben auch die Einhaltung von ILO-Kernarbeitsnormen. Deshalb treten wir als Kanada und Deutschland gemeinsam mit aller Klarheit für einen freien, fairen und offenen Welthandel ein, der auf einer regelbasierten Ordnung basiert und der deutlich macht, dass Werte und wirtschaftliche Interessen eben kein Gegensatz sind, sondern einander bedingen. Das Freihandelsabkommen zwischen Europa und Kanada, CETA, ist dafür ein gutes Beispiel, in dem wir ausdrücklich Regelungen zu verschiedenen wichtigen Fragen eben auch im Bereich von Arbeitnehmerinnenrechten und nachhaltiger Entwicklung sowie dem Schutz von geistigem Eigentum getroffen haben. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass wir mit einer Klarstellung jetzt zum Investitionsschutz auch als deutsche Bundesregierung dieses Abkommen schnellstmöglich ratifizieren können. Unsere wirtschaftliche Kooperation hat, und das ist die gute Nachricht, ich glaube, die wir heute beide deutlich unterstreichen können, riesiges weiteres Potenzial. Wir arbeiten schon jetzt eng zusammen im Rahmen der Partnerschaft für die Sicherheit von Mineralien und rücken auch hier Faktoren wie Nachhaltigkeit, Resilienz und die Verkürzung und Sicherheit von Wertschöpfungsketten und Lieferketten noch stärker in den Fokus, weil wir eben sehen, wie Abhängigkeiten auch zu Sicherheitsfragen werden können. Neben der stärkeren Zusammenarbeit mit Blick auf kritische Mineralien sind für uns als Deutsche ebenso die Fragen von Energie im Bereich LNG, aber eben auch Wasserstoff, vor allem grünen Wasserstoff, besonders wichtige Themen der weiteren Kooperation. Und ich glaube, auch hier, darüber haben wir gesprochen, wenn wir euer Land anschauen, die ganze Weite, die da ist. Wir haben gerade 2% der Landesfläche für Windkraft überall als das Ziel formuliert. Und ihr habt hier Fläche ohne Ende. Und deswegen ist eben die Frage von grünem Wasserstoff für uns auch so eine zentrale Zukunftsfrage der Zusammenarbeit. Nicht nur mit Blick auf unsere Energieversorgung, nicht nur mit Blick darauf, dass Energie auch ein Sicherheitsthema ist, sondern weil wir deutlich machen können, dass die Energie der Zukunft klimaneutral ist. Und unsere beiden Länder, unsere beiden Regierungen sind eben auch die Länder, die deutlich machen, dass wirtschaftliche Entwicklung Hand in Hand gehen muss mit Klimaschutz, damit wir nachhaltig sind, damit diese Wirtschafts- und Energiepartnerschaften auf stabilen Füßen stehen, aber eben auch, dass wir unseren Verpflichtungen im Pariser Klimaabkommen gerecht werden können. Liebe Melanie, gerade weil die Realität im Moment im Energiebereich noch eine andere ist und wir zum Beispiel in Deutschland im Bereich Gas nach wie vor mit den Folgen unserer Abhängigkeit von Russland kämpfen, sind wir, und das möchte ich an dieser Stelle wirklich von Herzen sagen, sehr dankbar für die Unterstützung, was die Turbine für Nord Stream 2 angeht. Ihr habt als Regierung, und Politik hat auch eine außenpolitische Komponente, aber immer natürlich eine innenpolitische Komponente. Ihr habt als Regierung für die europäische Solidarität eingestanden. Und das ist in diesen Zeiten keine Selbstverständlichkeit, sondern es unterstreicht gerade auch das Leadership dieser Regierung und auch des kanadischen Premierministers. Und dafür von unserer Seite herzlicher Dank. Ich glaube, dass es eben nicht nur Ausdruck ist der Solidarität Kanadas mit Europa, sondern es ist Ausdruck unserer gemeinsamen Geschlossenheit als G7, als transatlantisches Bündnis und vor allen Dingen als Wertepartner. In dem Moment, wo Russland versucht, Energie als Waffe einzusetzen und unser gemeinsames Bündnis zu spalten, deutlich zu machen, wir stehen beieinander, wir stehen miteinander ein. Und ich weiß, dass das für euch nicht einfach war, und dafür herzlichen Dank. Wir haben damit nicht nur deutlich gemacht, dass wir füreinander einstehen, dass ihr für uns einsteht, sondern wir haben gemeinsam auch den Bluff des russischen Präsidenten entlarvt. Und das ist wichtig in diesen Zeiten, weil dieser Krieg Russlands eben als hybrider Krieg geführt wird, nicht nur mit Bomben und Raketen auf unschuldige Menschen in der Ukraine, sondern als Kornkrieg, als Energiekrieg und eben auch ein Krieg mit Fake News. Das wird in diesen Tagen umso deutlicher, als die Turbine jetzt in Deutschland ist, aber eben nicht abgeholt, nicht in Empfang genommen wird. Und auch da wird der Bluff mehr als deutlich. Und natürlich, das ist für dich, Melanie, nichts Neues. Ich möchte es trotzdem hier einmal unterstreichen. Mit aller Kraftanstrengung, die wir haben, arbeiten wir unermüdlich daran, unsere Gasversorgung zu diversifizieren und schnellstmöglich von russischen Energiequellen komplett unabhängig zu werden. Dafür ist es eben so wichtig, dass wir bei neuen Energieprojekten in Zukunft auch weiter so eng zusammenarbeiten. Zugleich, das hat die kanadische Außenministerin bereits gesagt, deswegen kann ich das nur noch einmal unterstreichen, bei jedem Gespräch, was wir führen, geht es um die Ukraine. Dieser brutale Angriffskrieg, auch wenn er aus den Headlines der Zeitungen jetzt immer mehr herausfällt. Dieser tägliche Angriffskrieg geht weiter und er kostet jeden Tag Menschenleben. Hier in Kanada verfolgen das knapp 1,4 Millionen Menschen in der ukrainischen Diaspora sehr genau. Und auch bei uns in Deutschland gibt es viele Menschen, die eine Großmutter, die Freunde, die ehemalige Arbeitskollegen in der Ukraine haben. Und deswegen war es für viele Deutsche eine Selbstverständlichkeit. Und nichtsdestotrotz ist das bemerkenswert, wie viele ihr Zuhause geöffnet haben, um 900.000 geflüchteten ukrainischen, vor allen Dingen Frauen und Kindern, ein neues Zuhause zu geben. Das unterstreicht, dass es in diesen Momenten eben nicht nur um militärische Unterstützung geht, wo wir ebenfalls Hand in Hand arbeiten, um wirtschaftliche Unterstützung, sondern dass es eine gemeinsame weltweite Unterstützung von Menschen ist, die denjenigen in der Ukraine helfen, die jetzt angegriffen werden. Das macht ihr deutlich zugleich mit eurer Unterstützung im Bereich Getreide. Und auch hier mein herzlicher Dank, dass wir als G7 dieses Narrativ Russland brechen konnten, auch indem ihr eure Getreideexporte deutlich erhöht habt, und zwar eben nicht nur im Bereich Getreide, sondern eben auch Fertilizers, also Düngemittel, wo ja ebenso die Welt darauf angewiesen ist. Wir waren vorhin gemeinsam im Hafen von Montreal und haben den Getreideterminal besichtigt. Er verbindet den mittleren Westen der USA und die großen Seen mit Europa und ist nach Vancouver der zweitgrößte kanadische Hafen, nach Duisburg so der zweitgrößte weltweite Binnenhafen. Und es war beeindruckend zu sehen, dass hier bis zu 5.500 Tonnen Mais, Gerste, Sojabohnen, Trockenerbsen oder Raps innerhalb von Stunden verladen werden können. Ich unterstreiche das, weil du hast es angesprochen. Es geht dieser Tage eben auch um das, was die Menschen weltweit brauchen, weil eben auch die Lebensmittelpreise unglaublich in die Höhe schießen. Mit diesem Hafen, mit dieser Getreideanlage leistet ihr einen wichtigen Beitrag zur globalen Nahrungsmittelsicherheit. Und ich war lange in meinen Ausführungen, das unterstreicht aber, wie wichtig uns die Zusammenarbeit mit euch ist, wie wichtig es ist, dass wir gemeinsam zusammenstehen. Wir sind auf rauer See unterwegs, weil die Welt seit dem 24. Februar aus den Fugen geraten ist. Und umso wichtiger ist, dass unsere gemeinsamen Wertesegel in Einklang gesetzt sind und dass wir weiter einstehen für das internationale Recht. Und ich möchte mich dafür an dieser Stelle ausdrücklich bedanken.
Thank you, Ministers. We'll now be taking questions from reporters. We'll be alternating between Canadian and German media, and we'll be starting with you, Steve.
Good morning. It's Stephen Chase with the Globe and Mail.
How
Good
are
morning.
you, Steve?
I'm great, thanks.
I'm convinced you have many questions.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
My first question is for the Canadian minister, and I'd like to ask you about the Globe report that Canada received intelligence that Ukrainians who work for Western embassies in Kyiv were likely on the lists of people that Moscow intended to hunt down once the invasion began. And despite this, Ottawa told Canadian embassy leaders or officials in Kyiv to withhold this information about these target lists from the Ukrainian staff members who were left behind. Your office gave the Globe a statement suggesting you were unaware of these target lists. And they said should the minister have had information of locally engaged staff facing direct threats, she would have taken the necessary action to keep them safe. So my question for you is, are you saying you didn't know Canada had been informed that locally engaged staff in Western embassies were on Russian target lists? And if you didn't know, why?
Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, I must say that locally engaged staff in all our Canadian embassies are extremely important. And of course, we want to make sure that we ensure their safety and security, particularly in times of crisis, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. I've talked about the issue of locally engaged staff. Before the war, while I was in Ukraine, I actually spoke directly to them back in January, and I did many follow-ups with the department and the ambassador, Larissa Galaza, directly with her, not only in January, on February 24th, the day of the invasion, and afterwards. I must say that never did I or the department have any information targeting locally engaged staff. Canadian locally engaged staff. We never got that information, nor me, nor my team, nor the department. That being said, because Ukraine is a war-torn country, we wanted to make sure that they had options. They were offered options to come to Canada. Some of them have decided to come. Some of them have decided to stay. They were also given full payment and compensation and benefits, although for some time the diplomats were outside the country. So I know that we have a specific duty of care. I know there's been conversations within the department whether that duty of care applies to locally engaged staff. I would say that morally we have an obligation towards our locally engaged staff, and also there's been a process that has been launched within the department, which is called the Future of Diplomacy, which will look into these issues of duty of care, and I look forward to their recommendations.
Thank you. My follow-up question is for both the German minister and the Canadian minister, and it's about the Russian turbines. As you know, Canada issued a special sanctions permit that allows the import, repair, and re-export of up to 6 turbines over the next 2 years. But given the way that Gazprom and the Russians are dealing with the first turbine that has already been shipped to Germany, given the way they're playing games, and they're saying the turbine wasn't repaired properly in Montreal, and they're saying the documentation is not proper, and given the way they're trying to stymie even the delivery of this first turbine, would you reconsider, or should Canada reconsider this sanctions permit and scrap it to prevent the import and re-export of up to 5 more turbines because the Russians are just playing games?
Well, this is a difficulty of this brutal war, that this is not a rational thing, because otherwise we wouldn't have this war. So therefore, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what's going to happen with the other turbines. We just know that this turbine is now currently in Germany. All the papers are being fixed. It could be reinstalled with regards to Nord Stream 1. So the ball lays in the field of Russia. Yes, they are not playing within the rules of the normal games. So therefore, we follow every step they are taking. But I would just like to underline what I've said before. He tried to split us. He tried to play games with us. And now the whole world can see crystal clear that he is just using energy as a gameplay. And on the other hand, I think Canada has made very clear that in this difficult situation, and the reality is as it is, that we are still depending not only in Germany, but in Europe from Russian gas imports, that Canada is standing in solidarity with us Europeans, and I can just underline it. I'm very thankful for this, and I think our strongest weapon is the unity within this alliance. And again, we have shown as alliance that there's no chance, not a single inch, that Putin is successful in splitting us.
I would, so first and foremost, this was a difficult decision to take. It was a difficult decision that my colleague, Minister Wilkinson, and I consulted about on many occasions, including with our German counterparts, including with our Ukrainian counterparts, even facilitating conversation between Ukrainians and Germans. That was our goal. Our goal was to find a solution. That being said, I think the compelling argument that was presented by the minister is the one that Canada decided to support, because at the end of the day, we know that Putin is undergoing a hybrid war, which is, yes, affecting millions of Ukrainians in Ukraine, and at the same time, they're using their economic power to put pressure across the world, but particularly also in Europe. What we're seeing right now is Putin was trying to sow division within the alliance, within the G7, was trying also to find a pretext, an alibi, and in saying that it was because of the fault of the turbine. We called his bluff. It is now clear that Putin is weaponizing energy flows to Europe. The world sees through his game, and that's why we decided to make sure that we took a strong stance and a difficult decision by sending back the turbine directly to Germany.
Thank you.
I think it's German.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll go to German
Thank
media.
you. My name is Marina Kombaki. I'm with The Spiegel in Berlin, Germany. Meine erste Frage geht an Sie, Frau Außenministerin Baerbock. Das Thema Energie, Energiefragen hat eine große Rolle in Ihrem Gespräch gespielt. Ich würde Sie gerne ansprechen wollen auf eine Äußerung des Bundeskanzlers von heute Vormittag. Olaf Scholz hat gesagt, eine längere Laufzeit der 3 noch verbliebenen Kernkraftwerke in Deutschland sei möglich, Zitat, könne Sinn machen. Sehen Sie das auch so?
Das ist jetzt eine sehr innenpolitische Frage, deswegen kurz vielleicht für unsere kanadischen Freunde. Wir haben derzeit mit Blick auf die Situation der Strom- und Gasversorgung ständig eine Überprüfung, wie wir durch den Winter kommen. Deswegen haben wir ja auch die Gespräche geführt über diese Gasturbine, weil Gas essentiell ist für unsere Wärmeversorgung in Deutschland. Strom hingegen spielt für unsere Wärmeversorgung keine Rolle. Ich habe deswegen immer wieder deutlich unterstrichen, sowie andere Akteure dieser Bundesregierung ja auch, insbesondere der Wirtschafts- und Energieminister, dass mit Blick auf die gesicherte Wärmeversorgung im Winter diese Atomkraftwerke keine bedeutende Rolle spielen, weil es darum geht, dass Atomkraftwerke Strom herstellen. Nichtsdestotrotz machen wir einen zweiten Stresstest. Wir haben ja bereits einen Stresstest gemacht, weil, wie ich gerade gesagt habe, in dieser Situation, wo niemand die Zukunft vorhersehen kann, weil alle rationalen Regeln mit Blick auf die russische Regierung außer Kraft gesetzt sind, prüfen wir alle Eventualitäten. Wir haben aber bereits auch deutlich gemacht, und das sage ich als Mitglied meiner Partei, dass wir mit Blick auf Laufzeitverlängerung, und ich sage hier Laufzeitverlängerung, das für uns keine Option ist. Und der Kanzler hat ja auch unterstrichen, das finde ich wichtig bei seinen Äußerungen, dass wir über die Wärme- und damit Gasversorgung sprechen und nicht die Stromversorgung, die dafür, wie gesagt, einen ganz minimalen Beitrag überhaupt nur leisten könnte. Und in diesem Sinne wird jetzt dieser Stresstest durchgeführt und alles Weitere haben wir, glaube ich, in der Vergangenheit bereits klargestellt.
Meine Folgefrage für die kanadische Außenministerin, Ministerin Joly. Halten Sie oder wie blicken Sie auf den deutschen Ausstieg aus der Kernkraft angesichts, Sie haben es erwähnt, der Energiekrise, angesichts der Inflation? Und was kann und vor allem vielleicht wann kann Kanada, Deutschland und Europa bei der Gewährleistung seiner Energiesicherheit tatsächlich behilflich sein?
So obviously I won't comment on German domestic policies. What I can tell you though is that we see that there is an energy crisis happening in Europe and Canada is in solution mode. Obviously we are willing to see how we can provide solutions while keeping our strong commitment towards climate change. And in that context, obviously, we're looking at how we can, yes, work on liquefied natural gas, but at the same time, how can we work with offering hydrogen and green hydrogen? I've had many conversations within cabinet with the ministers of natural resources, with the Minister of the Environment, and obviously with the Prime Minister. I've had numerous conversations also with different provinces within the country, and we need to continue to have these conversations. At the same time, I would say that Canada believes in small nuclear reactors. We've invested in it, but we think that we need to move on also even more on renewables, and we have commitments to do so across the country.
Bonjour à vous deux. How's your French, Minister? How's your French? Do you want the questions in English?
If it's in English, that would be way better, yeah.
Okay, let's go for English. So I'll start off with a question for you, and then Minister Joly en français, of course. So just picking up on what your German journalist asked, Chancellor Scholz said that he wanted to keep 3 nuclear plants running. Why did you need to ask for the turbines? Isn't the nuclear plant energy enough to fulfill your needs? Puis, Madame Joly, sur les turbines, d'abord et avant tout, pourquoi est-ce qu'on parle de 6 turbines? Il y avait toujours été question d'une seule turbine. Puis, étant donné que la Russie ne semble pas en vouloir ou qu'ils utilisent ça comme jeu politique, pourquoi ne tout simplement pas résilier le contrat pour les prochaines turbines?
For the first part of your question, just to make clear, the Chancellor didn't say we keep on these 3 nuclear power plants running. We are currently checking because these 3 nuclear power plants are supposed to get offline and be totally shut down by the end of the year. We did one, we called it stress test, to see how important these nuclear power plants are still for electricity. Now we're doing a check again how important they are for heating. We know already from the data that because our nuclear power plants produce only electricity, and we don't have a big lack of electricity in Germany. We have a difficult situation in Bavaria because they didn't build renewable energy as much as they should. They didn't invest in the grids as much as they should. So therefore, we have, with regard to Bavaria, a different situation. But for the heating, these nuclear power plants do not make at all any difference because nuclear power plants cannot produce gas, what we need for the heating system. We have, and now it gets a bit complicated, we do have gas power plants, and they are combi power plants. They are mainly producing heat, and they have a byproduct of electricity. So there has been some argumentation, but if you would run these nuclear power plants, then these gas turbines or gas power plants, which also have the byproduct of electricity, might save this gas for heating. But technically, this is not possible to split this. So it gets all very complicated, and to say it in a nutshell, nuclear power plants do not help for our heating challenges we are facing. They do not help with regard to gas, and that is why I say it again, we are so thankful that Canada helped us out with regard to Nord Stream 1. And again, this is not just a German issue, it's a European issue. I think many of you know how my own position was also in the past with regard to Nord Stream 2, but this is spilled milk because the reality is that it is. And besides our common agreement with regard to this turbine, we have made crystal clear, and I would like to underline this as well. Yes, this has been a mistake to be so dependent on Russian cheap gas, and this is why we changed our policy with this by 180 degrees, saying we are totally phasing out of Russian gas supply. And this is why it's also so important for us when we are talking about new energy projects now in the future, that we are not only looking where's the cheapest price we can go also for LNG, but that we are making crystal clear that this partnership has to rely on common rules, on common standards, and this is why for us Canada is one of the most important partners, because we cannot come in a situation again where we are again in a lockdown and we have to pay millions to phase out of energy contracts, but we have to rely on energy partnership based on the rule of law and based on the Paris Climate Agreement.
That was a good answer.
Thank you.
Donc, pour répondre à ta question, premièrement, on n'a pas tous les détails du contrat entre Siemens. C'est vraiment une compagnie privée qui a un contrat avec Gazprom. Ce que je peux vous dire, par contre, c'est qu'il y avait un agenda de maintenance de 6 turbines sur 2 ans. Alors, dans les circonstances, basées sur les arguments qui nous ont été présentés par le gouvernement allemand, basé sur nos conversations que nous avons eues aussi avec nos homologues européens, avec nos homologues américains, avec nos homologues ukrainiens. Nous avons décidé de faire en sorte de donner ce permis. Et en même temps, l'idée même derrière notre réflexion, c'était certainement de donner aucune forme d'alibi ou de prétexte au président Poutine, qui essaie d'utiliser cet enjeu de turbine comme une façon de créer de la dissension entre alliés au sein de l'Ouest. Alors, c'est pourquoi nous avons été en mesure d'avoir aussi des déclarations de soutien très fortes qui proviennent de la Commission européenne, qui proviennent du département d'État américain et bien entendu de plusieurs alliés, parce qu'il va de soi que c'était la meilleure façon de maintenir l'unité au sein des alliés, alors qu'au même moment, on continue à aider l'Ukraine, on impose des sanctions importantes. Vous l'avez vu encore cette semaine, plus de 42 personnes ont été sanctionnées par le Canada pour leurs implications dans les atrocités de Bucha.
Juste la deuxième partie de la question, c'est pourquoi ne pas le résilier, étant donné qu'ils ne veulent pas au fond Gazprom?
C'est une décision entre Siemens et c'est une décision commerciale entre Siemens et Gazprom. Le gouvernement du Canada n'est pas impliqué dans cette décision-là.
Okay, picking up on what you said, Minister Baerbock, you mentioned the feminist foreign policy. Canada and Germany aren't des signataires, sorry, they did not sign the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Treaty. Why would you be willing, both countries, to sign it? And if so, if not, why not?
Sorry.
And this is related to the feminist foreign policy?
Well, it has some kind of relation, but nevertheless.
Mélanie, t'es-tu
Well,
élastique un peu?
Well, I think most importantly, and then I come back to the feminist foreign policy, is that we are not putting all the topics, which are the best topics and themes in the world, under the umbrella of feminist foreign policy. Because the most important thing for the feminist foreign policy is that we have equal rights, equal representation, and equal resources for women. And unfortunately, this is not the case right now worldwide, and also not in our own countries. You're more successful in some parts, we might be more successful in other parts, but for example, in the German parliament, there's a representation of women around mid-30%, which is obviously not 50%, and we have similar issues with regard to gender pay gap and other things. So for me, and I think Melanie and I totally share this understanding, feminist foreign policy is about bringing human rights which belong to every gender also to half of the world population. With regard to nuclear disarmament, also we can see there why it's important to have also a gender perspective on this, because we can see, for example, with nuclear testing, that it has different effects on also women's health with regard to cancer and other things. So feminist foreign policy means also always having like gender mainstreaming, which I think both countries are following also for internal policies, that we look at every topic, also what kind of different effects it has on gender. But with regard to a nuclear weapon-free world, and I just came back from New York, which is obviously a vision. However, it is also enshrined in the NPT treaty, saying how do we come to nuclear reduction, how do we come to risk assessment altogether to, at some point, and nobody knows when in humankind, we will be a world without nuclear weapons. So this is why, even though it's a way far-reaching vision, my country has joined for the first time the nuclear ban treaty as an observer state. I underline as an observer state because, and this is coming to your question, we are in NATO, and we are part of the nuclear sharing within NATO, because nuclear weapons are reality in our world today. And this is why, for me, nuclear sharing within NATO, and on the other hand, nuclear disarmament is not in contradiction, but it belongs to each other. The US underlined 2 days ago again that they are ready for every new start discussion. We underlined as NATO at the summit in Madrid that disarmament is crucial, because if we would come back to a situation where we could discuss together with the Russians about nuclear disarmament, this would make the region obviously safer, but we cannot even discuss currently about the visit of the International Committee of the Red Cross under the Geneva Convention of a wounded soldier. So this shows where we are standing, that reality means we have visions, but we have to also work a tiny step as we can in the current situation where Russia is attacking the European peace order.
Okay, so I'll try to be short because there are lots of people. So, premièrement, la politique féministe du gouvernement, la politique étrangère féministe du gouvernement est une fierté pour notre gouvernement parce que nous étions le 2e pays après la Suède à la mettre en place. Elle inclut plusieurs choses, que ce soit de l'aide humanitaire féministe, donc aider les femmes et les filles dans les régions appauvries du monde, et en même temps d'aider les femmes entrepreneurs au niveau de nos différentes missions commerciales en mettant de l'avant leur expertise et leurs services et produits. Et en ce sens-là, nous avons une approche qui est assez large, beaucoup plus large que plusieurs pays. Et plusieurs pays nous demandent des conseils pour mettre en place leur propre politique étrangère féministe. C'est le cas de l'Allemagne. Et c'est le cas des conversations que Annalena et moi avons eues, savoir qu'est-ce que le Canada peut offrir à titre d'exemple, de bonnes pratiques pour l'Allemagne, parce que je sais que ma collègue est certainement très intéressée à développer une politique étrangère féministe, alors qu'elle est la première femme ministre des Affaires étrangères en Allemagne. Maintenant, au niveau de la question nucléaire, on le sait présentement, depuis le 24 février, le monde est beaucoup plus instable. S'il s'agit de la plus grande menace pour la sécurité internationale depuis des décennies. Et on sait que présentement, et vous l'avez vu, vous l'avez entendu de la part du secrétaire général Guterres, il y a une énorme préoccupation par rapport aux tensions géopolitiques et au fait qu'il puisse y avoir une course vers l'avant pour l'obtention d'armes nucléaires par les pays qui en détiennent déjà ou par des pays qui voudraient éventuellement en détenir. Alors, on suit ce sujet de très près. Le Canada a toujours été très impliqué dans toute forme de négociation et d'engagement diplomatique sur le désarmement nucléaire. Ce sera le cas et nous allons travailler avec des partenaires, notamment l'Allemagne. Merci.
Thank you. We'll now go to German media. And since we're beginning to run out of time, I'd ask that you please keep questions brief. Merci.
Thank you. Stefan Detjen, I'm not sure if I'm audible. Is it okay? Stefan Detjen from Deutschlandfunk, the German National Public Radio. Meine erste Frage an Ministerin Baerbock. Der Mali-Einsatz im Rahmen der MINUSMA-Mission war ein Thema, das Deutschland und Kanada mal verbunden hat. Kanada hat sich im Laufe des Jahres aus dem Einsatz zurückgezogen. Jetzt haben wir die Nachrichten bekommen, dass die malische Regierung der Luftwaffe Überflugsrechte für Transportflugzeuge, die wichtig sind für die Sicherheit des Einsatzes, entzogen hat. Kann Deutschland seinen Einsatz unter dieser Voraussetzung fortsetzen?
Die Situation gerade ist alles andere als gut. Man braucht um den heißen Brei nicht herumzureden. Sie ist schlecht. Es ist, glaube ich, bekannt, dass ich gerade auch mit Blick auf den Besuch, den ich vor Ort in Mali und in Niger hatte, unterstrichen habe, wie wichtig diese UN-Mission, und das ist ja eine UN-Mission vor Ort, ist. Nicht um die Regierung Malis und erst recht nicht um diese militärische Übergangsregierung zu unterstützen, sondern um den Schutz zu gewährleisten, dass Hilfsorganisationen, dass die Vereinten Nationen vor Ort die wichtige Hilfe für die Menschen, die sie brauchen, geben können. Das ist der tägliche Gang zum Markt, der unsicher ist in einer Region, wo unterschiedliche Terrorgruppen aktiv sind. Das ist aber auch gerade die Unterstützung in einer Zeit, wo Lebensmittelpreise explodieren und viele Menschen sich vor Ort Brot, Hirse auf dem Markt kaum mehr leisten können. Deswegen hatte ich bereits im Frühjahr deutlich gemacht, wir müssen die wichtigen Voraussetzungen, die wir haben, als Regierung zum Schutz unserer Soldaten alle klären, damit wir vor Ort weiterhin aktiv sein können. Die eine Frage, die sich stellte mit Blick auf Abzug auch der Franzosen um die Hubschrauber, da hat sich gerade das Auswärtige Amt gemeinsam mit dem Verteidigungsministerium sehr eingesetzt, über den Generalsekretär der Vereinten Nationen andere Akteure zu finden, die diese Hubschrauber und diese Fähigkeiten stellen können, damit unsere Sicherheitsketten aufrechterhalten werden können. Nun hat sich die Lage, so wie Sie es beschrieben haben, so zugespitzt, dass von Seiten der malischen Übergangsregierung immer wieder unser Engagement torpediert wird. Ich habe deswegen auch mit dem Generalsekretär der Vereinten Nationen genau darüber gesprochen, was vor Ort die Vereinten Nationen, sein entsprechender Zuständiger Herr Lacroix, in den Gesprächen mit der malischen Regierung auch deutlich machen könnte, dass natürlich, wenn die Vereinten Nationen vor Ort sind, es nicht sein kann, dass ihre Arbeit torpediert wird oder die Sicherheit der vielen, vielen internationalen Akteure in Frage gestellt wird. Gemeinsam mit den anderen Truppenstellern sind wir deswegen in Gesprächen, wie die derzeitige Situation ist. Auch die Frage, die gerade kam mit Blick auf die Ukraine, das Gleiche gilt für Mali. Wir sind natürlich genau im Bilde dessen, wie viele Akteure wir nicht nur von Seiten der Bundeswehr, wie viele zivile Kräfte vor Ort sind, was Ortskräfte vor Ort machen, um in dieser angespannten Lage uns auf alle Eventualitäten vorzubereiten. Ich möchte aber unterstreichen, und das ist auch unser gemeinsames Verständnis von denjenigen Truppen, die vor Ort sind, wir möchten dort im Sahel in Mali bleiben, weil die Menschen vor Ort uns brauchen. Und zugleich ist wichtig, wenn wir dort bleiben, müssen wir unsere Arbeit so machen können, dass wir Menschenleben schützen, dass wir Hunderttausende von Menschen überhaupt die Basisversorgung sicherstellen können und dass der Schutz unserer Soldaten gewährleistet ist. Und das überprüfen wir, besprechen wir gerade tagtäglich mit den Vereinten Nationen, mit den anderen Truppenstellern und natürlich auch im Rahmen der deutschen Bundesregierung.
Danke. Follow-up-Frage an beide Ministerinnen. Ist der Besuch der Chefin des Repräsentantenhauses Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan ein gutes Signal zur Unterstützung der Demokratie in Taiwan? Und was können die anderen westlichen Nationen, was können Deutschland und Kanada tun, um Taiwan gegen die neuen Drohgebärden und eine nach Einschätzung von Geheimdiensten drohende Invasion Chinas in Taiwan zu schützen?
Okay, so of course we're extremely concerned with the heightened tensions in the region. We've had a conversation, Annalena and I, about this. I also spoke to Secretary Blinken a couple of days ago regarding this very issue. Of course, we're also very preoccupied by the threatening action that China is taking and their economic coercion. We think that legislators do visits around the world, and clearly the visit cannot be used as a justification for heightened tensions or a pretext. And so in that sense, we call on China to de-escalate, because we think that there may be risks of not only heightened tensions, but also destabilizing the region.
Ihre Frage zeigt ja bereits, wie herausfordernd die derzeitige weltweite Lage ist. Konflikte an ganz unterschiedlichen Orten dieser Welt, und deswegen ist Deeskalation das oberste Gebot in diesen Stunden, in diesen Zeiten. Und deswegen haben wir als G7-Partner gerade auch gemeinsam nochmal unterstrichen, dass wir dazu beitragen wollen zur Deeskalation der Lage in der Straße von Taiwan. Seit langem verfolgen wir gemeinsam, unsere beiden Länder, eine Ein-China-Politik, und wir erkennen die Volksrepublik China als einzigen souveränen Staaten in China an. Das haben die USA gemeinsam mit uns eben im Rahmen der G7 deutlich gemacht. Und im Rahmen unserer Ein-China-Politik unterhält Deutschland zugleich enge Beziehungen zu Taiwan, insbesondere in den Bereichen Wirtschaft, Kultur, Bildung, Wissenschaft und Forschung. Taiwan ist zugleich für uns als gefestigte Demokratie mit hohen Menschenrechtsstandards ein wichtiger Wertepartner. Und daher ist klar, eine Änderung des Status quo in der Straße von Taiwan kann nur friedlich und im gemeinsamen Einvernehmen aller Beteiligter erfolgen. Und Besuche wie derzeit dürfen nicht als Vorwand für militärische Drohgebärden genutzt werden. Und in diesem Verständnis, wie gesagt, rufen wir als G7-Partner zur Deeskalation in der derzeitigen Situation auf und formulieren zugleich, ähnlich wie Kanada, eine China-Strategie oder ihr nennt es eine Indo-Pazifik-Strategie, die wir gemeinsam miteinander natürlich aufs Engste abstimmen.
Bonjour, Madame Joly, Valérie Gamage de Radio-Canada. Tout d'abord, j'ai besoin de vous entendre sur Taïwan. Il n'y a pas eu encore de communiqué officiel du G7. Est-ce qu'il y a division au sein des pays du G7 et quelle est la position du Canada là-dessus? Est-ce que vous appuyez la visite de Mme Pelosi à Taïwan?
Mais il va de soi qu'il va y avoir un communiqué du G7. On est en train de finaliser le tout. Et bien entendu, pour nous, on est très préoccupés par ce qui se passe. Et les tensions que l'on voit dans la région. J'ai eu l'occasion, comme je l'ai dit en anglais, d'en parler certainement avec mon homologue allemande, mais également récemment, il y a quelques jours, avec mon collègue Tony Blinken, secrétaire d'État américain. Et bien entendu, nous sommes très préoccupés par non seulement les actions menaçantes de la Chine, mais aussi par sa coercion économique, donc sa riposte économique. Qu'elle peut utiliser par rapport à différents pays. Et on sait que des visites de la sorte, qui se font par des membres de différents parlements à travers le monde, se font de façon routinière, sont normales. Alors, la visite de Mme Pelosi ne peut pas être utilisée comme une justification pour des actions menaçantes. Alors, dans les circonstances, nous en appelons à ce que la Chine réduise les tensions, fasse en sorte aussi de ramener de la stabilité dans la région, parce que si ce n'est pas le cas, il pourra potentiellement y avoir non seulement des tensions, mais une déstabilisation entière de la région. Et ça, ce serait extrêmement préoccupant pour nous, le Canada, alors que nous sommes une nation qui a une côte pacifique très importante, et donc nous sommes très impliqués dans la région, mais aussi pour tous les alliés du G7.
Et puis concernant la sécurité énergétique, bon, il est question de maintenir peut-être ces centrales nucléaires actives. Est-ce que le Canada pourrait en faire plus? Est-ce que vous pourriez négocier avec votre collègue des ressources naturelles pour envoyer peut-être plus de carburant, plus d'énergie provenant du Canada en Allemagne pour aider à la crise actuelle?
Il y a certainement des discussions au niveau de différents projets énergétiques liés au gaz naturel liquéfié, mais aussi à cette transition importante vers l'hydrogène. Parce qu'on le sait qu'on doit continuer à lutter contre les changements climatiques et la façon de le faire va être d'épouser les solutions liées aux énergies renouvelables, dont celle de l'hydrogène. J'en ai parlé certainement avec mon collègue des ressources naturelles, j'en ai parlé avec le ministre de l'Environnement, j'en ai parlé aussi avec le gouvernement Legault, parce que c'est très important que les Québécois, les Canadiens soient au courant de ce qui se passe en Europe et qu'on soit là à la table pour offrir des solutions.
Merci, c'est tout le temps que nous avions aujourd'hui. This is all time we had for. Thank you everyone. Ceci met fin au point de presse.
in the job. But this was happening on December 10th, and Annalena had been appointed on December 8th. So she was even much more a youngster in terms of foreign minister, because her term was only 2 days old. But she and I hit the ground running. And when the war started on February 24th, we were ready. Since then, I've had the opportunity to go many times to Europe, a dozen of times, 5 times to Germany, and collaborate a lot with Annalena and her team, and also work within the G7. Germany is hosting the G7 also this year, so that's why also it's been a very important partnership, because more than ever, the G7 has become this group of coordination, particularly when it comes to sanctions against President Putin and his enablers. And at the same time, we've been working very closely to isolate diplomatically, economically, and politically Russia and supporting Ukraine. Annalena has gone, I think, 2 times to Ukraine. I've gone 2 times to Ukraine before the war, after the war, pretty much at the same time, within the same week. And we've been in close contact with the Ukrainian government. Now, as we're dealing with what's happening in Ukraine, we're also looking at what's going on in the world in general. And we've been, through the G7, making sure that we have strong foreign minister statements regarding what's going on regarding Ukraine, but also what we're seeing happening in Taiwan. So this is an ongoing work and friendship and relationship. The goal is to make sure that this friendly relationship, which are always important in diplomacy, also becomes true between people to people, between Germans and Canadians, entre les Allemands et les Québécois et les Canadiens. Parce qu'on a vraiment cette relation très forte avec l'Allemagne, non seulement parce qu'ils sont des alliés du G7, mais aussi parce qu'il y a cette amitié transatlantique qui s'est imposée au cours des années, et aussi, on le sait, l'Allemagne est un partenaire économique. And now we know that when we think about the future, and we'll talk about this, we definitely need to make sure that we're closer to our friends, and that we do business amongst friends, and that we work with countries that follow the rules, and that we are there in times of needs, particularly for Europe right now, and particularly for Germany as they're facing an energy crisis. So we'll have the chance to talk more about this, but it is really a pleasure to be with you, Annalena, et ça me fait grand plaisir de vous revoir tout un chacun. Merci beaucoup. Annalena, please come.
Bonjour, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. C'est de la grande importance pour moi d'être au Canada enfin. Votre pays est une des amis plus proches des Allemands. And now my French language friendship ends, and I switch to English. So it's not only because of our strong ties between our countries, but Melanie has underlined this also personally. So you've been 5 times to Germany. Unfortunately, I would like to say, because I owe you 4 times, and I don't know how I should make this up within the next 3 years. But no, I'm really happy to be here with you, Mel, but also with all of you in this room, because we are not geographically neighbors, obviously, but we are really neighbors at heart. I think we can especially see this in this dire time, and I'm really happy that you're here also as a Ukrainian ambassador at this event, because we in Europe, and I think this counts also for your country, we always thought that democracy, freedom, and peace is just a normal given. Mel and I did not only start in the same half-year foreign ministers, but we are almost same age, and we have lived all our lives in peace. But we realize now at this time that peace is not an automatically given thing, but we have to fight for peace. We have to fight for democracy and our liberal values as human rights. And in this time, standing together as G7, not as the strongest economic powers, but even more as a value partner, I think is more important than ever. And therefore, I believe this is really not only a very challenging time, and the horrors we hear from Ukraine are almost unbearable, but this is also a historic transatlantic moment. Over the past few months, Europe, the United States, and Canada have stood resolutely side by side, maybe even closer than after the Cold War, and I'm sitting next to one of your senators, which remember the Cold War maybe a bit better than the two of us, because we were just born when it came to an end. But I think anyhow comparisons are not the right recipes for policies, because then you just copy the past and you don't build the future. And now it's really about building the future for our children's generation, that they can also live in peace with Europe at the heart of the European family. And I think it was one of the strongest signals that we made clear Ukraine doesn't only belong to Europe in our hearts, but also with the membership. And it was really important to jump in these crucial times to say Ukraine is a candidate country like Moldova. And this was also important, even though obviously Canada is not a member, unfortunately, of the European Union. However, it was Canada, and it was you in person, Mel, that when Moldova called and said, we need you, we arranged just within 2 weeks, and this is also maybe new for our ministries, that we both said, well, this conference is quite soon, it's in a couple of weeks, because Moldova said we need now a platform of help. And we cooperated together on the refugees part, and I'm really thankful also not only for the cooperation in values and within treaties over decades, but also about the strong cooperation on practical grounds, to think out of the box in times when it's not about talking, but it's about action. So therefore, I think when we are speaking now about the new geopolitical challenges, what we are doing in a couple of minutes, we can speak about so many things which are frightening us or which are really difficult. But I think we should never forget that the most important thing is to believe. And I was yesterday in New York speaking at the New School, where one of our very famous thinkers, Hannah Arendt, went to the university in exile. And in the darkest time of German history, in the darkest time of the European Union, she, as others, did not give up, but they believed that they can build a future together even in exile. So I think this is really the call why we are here today, because to build this future together, not only between governments, but between countries and citizens. And this is also something we brought, I think, a bit new into politics, not only meeting between ministries and in buildings where I still have to adapt to the coolness of air conditions on the Transatlantic other side of the ocean, but meet people. And I'm really glad and thankful that I can go today also through your town to learn from you how you do immigration policies, celebrating at least the majority in your country diversity as a benefit and as a strength. And this understanding also intensifying our economic ties, because we are here at the Chamber of Commerce, and you were just mentioning, Mr. President, that you just have been to Hanover, my hometown, beautiful city. All of you businessmen here in the room, the senator was correctly advising you should not go to the fair, but also to the Hanover Zoo, the best zoo on the world. We are here in the best city of the world. We have the best zoo in the world. So I'm really looking forward to start my day trip here at your place, because I think, especially on economic ties, we can build our friendship even stronger. Et s'il n'y avait pas l'Atlantique qui nous séparait, je vous laisserai comme cadeau un papier d'adhésion à l'European Union for the European Union. So this was horrible. So if the Atlantic wouldn't split up, I would leave like the papers for European membership here at the table, and maybe you can think about it while we're discussing if you would like to join. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, both of you. And it's a promise I will visit the zoo. First question, very light question. Madame Joly, Mélanie Joly, what does it represent for you to have your friend, your counterparts from Germany in Canada today? What does it represent for you?
I think I've been so much in Germany, it was just payback time. No, but quite frankly, it's a pleasure to have Annalena, because obviously it is important for Canada to have strong relationships, obviously with Europe, with the US, etc. But I'm glad to be able to share you a bit of what I'm seeing when I'm going to Europe, and that you can hear from yourselves also the type of discussions that we have together. And so when it comes to foreign policy, sometimes we're a lot in our different conference rooms and spheres, isolated from people. And my goal was to go back to my hometown and bring Annalena here. We will have also more people coming from abroad in Montreal in the spring to explain what's going on, particularly in Europe and in the world in general. And, you know, it's just great to have Annalena here, too.
Minister Baerbock, my question will be tougher now. Now, you know, over the years, we saw Europe evolving. You know, there was the crisis, the 2009 crisis, Greece at the center of it, the financial crisis. There were some issues with democracy, perhaps in Hungary, Poland. We had the Brexit coming, and now this war in Ukraine. So a simple question, how should the world and Canada perceive Europe at this moment? Is Europe strong? Is Europe unified? Is Europe fragile? How should we perceive Europe at this moment?
Well, I would say Europe matters. We see the war in Ukraine on the sad picture, but we see also that if we are not standing together as a European Union, and again, this is a moment of hope, the whole European Union was always built in the darkest times. After the Second World War, it was France, Poland, and many other countries who were ready to forgive us. And by this, they built the European Union, or at those time, the Community for Coal and Steel. And afterwards, also in times when it was really tough, the answer was not, we are going to split, but we built this European Union even stronger. And we are again at this crossroads, that we have to decide whether we say we turn back into our national homes, or do we unite and stand united together. And by all differences and challenges, and obviously there are some, you were mentioning some of them already, I think the European Union has never been so united than these days in the last decades. And I think the same counts also for G7 and also NATO. Like again, I'm a generation, like when I was 2 years old, I was on the streets, well, obviously I didn't decide it myself, but demonstrating against the Persians stationing being in Germany. And now I'm a mother of 2, and children in Germany are saying just randomly, well, I really like the NATO. Yeah, and you see how times are changing, because people realize at this moment we have to stand united together, and also organizations have changed. Also with regard to NATO, we were drafting together as foreign ministers at the Berlin informal summit, where we were sitting together at the table, the new strategic concept of NATO. And it was, I must say, not only the 2 of us, but I would say a lot of women at the table saying we have to underline what's the purpose of NATO. The purpose of NATO is not just we are taking more money in our hands because we like military so much, But the purpose of this taking more money in our hands, as we do in Germany right now, is to defend our values, freedom and peace. And I think this is really the momentum we as Europeans, together with our transatlantic friends and partners, are working on today. And this counts also with the support for Ukraine.
So, on your side, Minister Joly, how would you define at this moment Canada's vision of Europe? What is our role regarding this Europe?
Well, I think Canada's role has always been to create a bridge between the US and Europe. Because of our understanding of Europe and nos deux langues officielles, le français et l'anglais, le fait qu'on était aussi proche de la France, the fact that we were able to play that role, and we're a country part of the G7, we understand better than anyone in Europe what's going on in the US, and so we were able to play that role. Now, I think also in the context of this crisis, which is the Ukraine one, and it's great to see Yulia, our Ukrainian ambassador here, it was important to bring also our expertise regarding Ukraine, because we have 1.4 million Ukrainian Canadians, which is the biggest diaspora outside Russia, and we understand Ukraine. Since 2014 also, we had military personnel training Ukrainian forces, 30,000 of them. Lots of, when I was in Ukraine, I met with soldiers of Valcartier that were training Ukrainian soldiers, and that was before the war. And, they come from all parts of Canada, but the Valcartier one had developed a very strong relationship with their Ukrainian counterparts. So that's also what we were bringing to the table, being able to bring the Ukrainian perspective and at the same time create the bridge between Ukraine and also other countries within the European Union. I think also that we're the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with other G7 countries. So it is the case with NAFTA, l'ALENA, clearly CETA, donc l'accord de libre-échange avec l'Europe, and at the same time CPTPP, which is the one with Asia. We're a strong trading and partner, not only because we have all these free trade agreements, but we are reliable. We act according to rules, which in the business sector is key because we mitigate risks by doing that. That's our role as a government, to make sure that we mitigate risks for you folks afterwards who are dealing and trying to prosper through your different businesses and create jobs around the country. So also the fact of having this strong economic relationship through free trade, which is quite new with Europe, on the free trade side, not on economic partnership, but enabling that even more was also something that we worked a lot on. But that's also my vision of the relationship with Europe.
Minister Baerbock, we have to speak we have to speak about Ukraine. It took some time to see where Germany would stand just because of the dependency on energy, and we'll come back to energy later. But at this moment, the impression that people have is that this might be a long-term war. It might last for a while. What's your reading of Germany's population and perhaps Europe in terms of, can this continue for months and years? Would you say Germany and Europe is prepared for a long-lasting war?
Well, everybody in Germany and in Europe, as I think in Canada, is wishing that this war would stop tomorrow, even yesterday, because this is the most horrible thing you can even imagine. I mean, everybody in the room just imagining your daughter, your mother, your friend, your neighbor is just being killed because they were walking to the supermarket and then a rocket just hit the supermarket building. So we are trying, and I think this is what we always have to underline, and I know that the two of us are doing this. It's not up to us that this war is going on. We are calling every day on Russia to stop this war. But unfortunately, there is a precedent which is not in a democracy like ours. If you would do this like ministers to your own country, inflation rates exploding, people leaving the country. I guess many are also coming to your country, especially those one being really educated in digital services. If you're doing this to your country, that people are kind of locked off from the rest of the world, everybody would have to resign. So in this regard, so maybe we can give the women a question, and then we can have the discussion.
Let the women make her point and then leave.
So in this regard, and maybe taking up what is on the paper, NATO said, we are doing everything to stop this war by talking to Russia, by arguing with different institutions, by sanctions, but by military support. But unfortunately, it lays only in the hand of Putin. He could stop this war together at this moment if he just wanted. But if he's not doing so, as we can see right now, and I share your assessment, we probably have to face the reality that this war will go on for the next months and maybe even years. For us, the answer is crystal clear. We support Ukraine as long as they need us, financially with humanitarian aid and also with military support. And I know that there are some headlines that economies are suffering, I would say, outside Europe even more than inside Europe. But people are ready to stay in solidarity. They have opened their homes. They are sharing their children's or living rooms. Well, obviously, nobody says, if there's a question, do you like the high energy prices? I mean, who would say yes to this kind of question? Everybody said, I would prefer if the energy prices go low. So this is why we subsidize, especially families with low income. But if the question is, for the sake that we are leaving Ukrainians alone, taking into account that other places in Western Ukraine would look like Irpin and Bucha, would you in this regard stop the support of Ukraine? The vast majority of our people, as in Canada, would say no. We stand in solidarity with Ukraine, and obviously we do this also as governments, even though if the polls might go down, this is not a time where you look at polling data. This is a time where leadership is needed, and this is why it's so important that we stand united within G7 and also NATO, even though the women might disagree on that one.
Yeah, that's... Although this is a private room, it's a good thing that in our society people can have different views and express them. Madame Joly, do you share this vision that we're in for the long haul, even if it takes months or years?
Yeah, and I agree with what Annalena just mentioned. I would say that we have to bear in mind that since it will take time, and since, yes, Ukraine will need our support, we have to be ready against any form of fatigue. We already see that the news regarding Ukraine are not as front pages as they used to be. And they sporadically become front pages when they're really, really bad. Well, you know, obviously the war in itself is extremely bad, but
horrible.
You know, horrible like Bucha and Irpin. But meanwhile, people are still dying, and people are forced to leave their homes, and women and children are being raped. This is happening as we speak. And we were in Ukraine in January. Ukraine is a modern country. You know, Yulia and I were talking about Montreal and how much she likes Montreal. It's great to know that the Ukrainian ambassador likes Montreal. But, you know, Kyiv is, I would say, a beautiful city. Beautiful, modern city. And in that sense, you know, this is happening, a war, an invasion, not only a war, an invasion by a country on another country is happening in Europe as we speak. We never thought that could happen. And what we're seeing right now is our stance on Ukraine will conduct other authoritarian regimes' behavior. And so that's why we have to be ready also for the long haul. This is about what other you know, obviously China's watching. Obviously other countries are watching. And this is not about accepting that countries have zones or spheres of influence. This is not how our system since the Second World War has been built. We have built an international rule-based system where basically there's predictability. There's free trade agreements, there's international conventions. So ultimately, this creates much more stability. But when countries go against this, and when they act based on might make right, which is basically le plus fort fait la force, it's problematic. And as a country, we're 40 million. We're a middle-sized power. We know that. We're a G7 country. We're strong economically. We're strong at many levels. But at the same time, we've helped build this international rule-based system since the Second World War. We've benefited from it. We've been architects and engineers of this system. And for it to be contested is existential for us as well, because we also live next to a giant. And we have another giant next to us in the north. And so that's why also it's important for us to be in this existential battle that Ukrainians are fighting for all of us.
Madame Baerbock, we don't necessarily have to go back in history to look who's responsible for the decisions, but clearly the dependency when it comes to gas with Russia, the dependency on Russia, leads people to think that maybe Germany cannot make all the political decisions that it would be required because of that dependency. What do you answer to that? Are you concerned about next winter and perhaps the impact on your political decisions about the availability of gas during the winter? How do you approach that? An easy question.
Yeah, I would like to split the first and the second part, because the question, do you think you cannot take any some decisions because of the gas dependency? The question is now, what decision? There was no doubt after the 24th of February, it was a Thursday, I think everybody remembers, it was a Thursday till our rest of our lives because it turned our world upside down. And on Sunday, we had a voting and we had a session in the German Bundestag, where we said we turn our course on military support from Germany by 180 degrees. So one part of the question is no. Our dependency on Russia, which is obviously was there in the past heavily and is still there, didn't stop us at this moment from saying we stand with Ukraine, and from this day on also with military support. There was no doubt in the German government. On the other hand, with regard to energy, and this was also me personally, even though, and everybody knows this, I said already for a couple of years, I think the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is a geopolitical pipeline, and this is not just a business case. But I also said then after the 24th, not because I was a foreign minister, but I had to look what reality is, that we cannot have an oil and gas embargo from one day. We were discussing this question, and I think this is also the strength of good friends, that at points where you might disagree, or you look from different perspectives, you don't say, well, you're just stupid and you don't understand it, but you take the other seat of this round table and you cannot say, okay, this is the front of a round table. You just take the other perspective. And if I have a 6 at my plate and Melanie has a 9 at her plate, I can say, well, obviously it's a 6, and you can say, obviously it's a 9, or we can just be ready to go in the shoes of the other person or change the seats. And then we realize, all right, from your perspective, it looks definitely differently, and maybe you're also right. And I'm really thankful that we could do this within G7, within the European Union, within NATO, to understand that obviously if you don't depend on Russian gas, it's easy to say tomorrow we have an embargo. If we are depending on oil and gas, what we did, I mean, no question, and yes, it was a fault, it was a mistake, then we had to have a plan how we can step out by this. We have been challenged a lot for this, But I think the best thing in politics is to say, these are the facts and the grounds, and these are my arguments why we are doing this. And we have been phasing out now by gas. We had a dependency before the war of 55%. Now we are down to 26. Obviously, this is not zero. So this is why the turbine, we probably speak about it later, also played an important issue for us. But the question is not whether we are on the side of Russia. Well, obviously not. But the question was, if we start this sanctions regime, can we uphold it, your first question, over months or even years? And I said, when we start sanctions, we have to be ready to uphold it also over the next winter. When gas prices are going up, what they definitely will, then I cannot say on the 23rd of December, well, tomorrow's Christmas, here's my Christmas present for all the German citizens, we stop the sanction on Russia. I mean, then we would give up with everything we are standing for. And this is why, thanks God, we could agree together within the European Union, together with our G7 partners, to say, okay, for gas and oil, we have a phase-out path together with our friends. We promise we go down to zero. We promise we learn from this situation that we never get into this dependency again, and we stand with this in solidarity together. Due to this help of our friends, we are providing now a plan over winter. We are looking at every scenario. You asked how hard will it be? If we have 2 months with minus 10 degrees, then it will be really tough, really, really tough. But we didn't have that since the time I was born, and my kids, unfortunately, hardly know snow, even though sometimes we're going to the Alps. So, I mean, this is really the worst case scenario, but we are also looking into this. But we are preparing all the other scenarios as well, and not as Germany alone, together with our European friends and partners. And this, again, is the strength of Europe. We made a decision to reduce energy by 15%, energy saving, a debate which you could never imagine 2 years ago, talking about climate. Everybody will say, well, energy saving, what kind of project is this? Now we are doing this. So this also shows in the toughest time we're not only standing together, but we can fight also another crisis, a climate crisis, if we're doing it the clever way. And therefore, even though it will be tough times over winter, I'm quite positive because we have taken some good and solidarity decisions altogether.
Madame Joly, we mentioned the turbine. There was this demand that we kind of have an exception for the sanctions and send back the turbine. So maybe a comment on that, but also even more, we as Canadians have natural gas. We as Canadians have debate about whether we should make it more available. We in Quebec had debate about whether we should have a GNL project to make sure that that gas would be available for the rest of the world. What's your views on our responsibility in this crisis?
Yeah. So I'll take your question in 2 parts as well. First part on the question of the turbine. So you've heard maybe about it, which is basically President Putin is alleging right now that because of a turbine issue being in Canada, he cannot continue the flow of gas to Germany through Nord Stream 1 and through the rest of Europe. And so he's using that as an alibi because there's basically a maintenance issues and the turbines are being fixed here in Montreal at Siemens. Now, we were contacted by the German government a couple of months ago regarding this issue. And at the time, it was we started many conversations about this, talking with the German official, talking with Europeans, talking with Ukrainians, talking with Americans as well, to see what we had to do. Because obviously we knew that if we would be sending back the turbine to Germany, then it would be going against our sanctions. And what the argument that prevailed was finally the fact that we had to call Putin's bluff. Should he weaponize energy flows going from Russia to Europe, he needed to make it clear. It needed to be clear for the world. So he could not use the pretext of a turbine stuck in Montreal. as the reason for why he was basically reducing the flow of Nord Stream 1. So that's why we decided to send it back. It was a frustrating moment, I must say, but at the same time, we are all united, the G7, Europe, the NATO allies, Ukraine, fighting against Putin. And Putin is undergoing not only a war in Ukraine, but he is undergoing a hybrid type of war, which is mixed with economic coercion. Economic coercion, which is using energy and weaponizing it, but also food, and weaponizing food, particularly to African countries and Asian countries. And this is why we need to continue to be united, because obviously more we're divided, more we're weakening our support to Ukraine, and more bit by bit we won't be able to continue to be united, to fight this existential war, and to have our people and our different democracies supporting the fight against Russia. Now, the other thing regarding energy security in Germany. So yes, there's been LNG issues, well, discussions for years in Canada. And you know, and Annalena mentioned it, I think that Europe was more interested for a long time in cheap Russian gas than, you know, and minerals, than maybe our energy solutions and our critical minerals. And because why? We have stronger labor standards, stronger environmental standards, and the cost of our energy and the cost of our critical minerals are higher. But at the same time, I think that there's a reckoning happening, and that reckoning is part of why Germany is knocking at our door to invest in projects, in LNG projects, but also LNG projects are for the transition. It's really eventually hydrogen. So that is why I've been in contact with the Quebec government, with other governments, New Brunswick and Newfoundland, and obviously my colleagues, the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Natural Resources, have all been involved because it's important to come up with solutions. Solutions for now, because as Annalena was saying, the crisis is happening now, but for the future. And so that is why I think hydrogen is important. And that Québécois, les Québécois, ça vaut la peine qu'on regarde, qu'on étudie davantage ce qu'on peut faire en matière d'hydrogène, parce que je pense qu'on a une force au Québec avec un mélange, oui, d'hydrogène, mais aussi le fait qu'on a de l'hydroélectricité. Donc, ça fait en sorte que l'hydrogène qu'on peut produire est de l'hydrogène vert. Et en ce sens-là, ça peut encore plus aider l'Europe et nous-mêmes à faire la transition énergétique.
So, Minister Baerbock, I think that we're in for a debate in Canada, and that's why she was saying it in French. We need to have a discussion.
My pronunciation is horrible, but I understand it. So.
I have one last question. I have plenty of questions, but I want to touch base about Nancy Pelosi and her presence in Taiwan. And the reason why I want to raise that is you're heads of diplomacy, and Nancy Pelosi is using diplomacy. It's a soft diplomacy, it's just a trip, but it's a meaningful trip. I can't... Okay. Voilà. So my question is about your role as diplomats and the place of the soft diplomacy in a time of tension. What Nancy Pelosi is doing sends a strong message. It's not a gun, it's not an explosion. She's just traveling. How do you see your role as the heads of diplomats in sending message through diplomacy in this time and age? So let's start with Minister Baerbock and Baerbock.
well, first of all, it's interesting how many people are getting engaged with Green Party and NATO issue. But let me say one sentence to this, because I think this is important. I think actually also for younger people, the most important thing about politics is, even though sometimes we as politicians also play this game, especially when we are opposition and then government parties, to make the world more simple than it is, black and white, yes and no. But obviously the world is not as simple as that, and actually no individual life or family is like this. If you sit together at the dinner table and you ask, so what do we want to do tomorrow? Somebody wants to go to the zoo and the other one wants to go to the fair trade, yeah? And then you have to find a compromise at some moment. And this is similar with regard to my party, the NATO, the question. We are in times, and it was back in time when Joschka Fischer was still a politician in Germany and a foreign minister, saying, well, we use, and I think this also unites us between our countries, force and military as last resort. But we are also responsible, especially my party, that genocide will never happen again. And there are some times that these values conflict. And then you have to say, okay, what is the biggest responsibility and what does the last harm? And this goes for NATO those days, and this also goes back in time, which Russia is using as a pretext now for Ukraine, about Kosovo. Yes, and I think it was right back in time, and again, it's right now. If we have to decide between perpetrators and victims, if we have to decide between human rights and the rights of the strongest, we take the side of human rights. We take the side of the victims, and we also support them military. Jumping to China now and the visit of Ms. Pelosi. Well, obviously, this is a trip which is being used as a pretext for something else. So this is why I called now in the press conference, the same as the Canadian foreign minister, same as all the other 5 foreign ministers of G7, for de-escalation. We are living in a world where we see conflicts all over, so we don't need another conflict. So I think de-escalation is the most important thing. We underlined that there's a one China policy from our 2 countries, and we underlined as well that we are standing for human rights. I think also this also unites our countries, our governments at the current moment, that we don't keep silent on what is happening in Xinjiang with regards to human rights. I underlined very often, therefore, and maybe coming back at the business issue, this is not about values if you're saying there's no forced labor product on European market. This is also a question of fair competition. I mean, how can we call, Melanie was underlining this, that your companies, our companies are obviously abiding to labor laws, to human rights, to environmental standards, and then we say, well, but we don't care if products are coming from third countries, which do price dumping by forced labor. So I think making this clear, that we are standing for diplomacy, and you were asking about diplomacy, which is putting all the efforts on de-escalation, and on the other hand, we are not keeping silent when we have a fundamental breach of human rights or a fundamental breach of international law.
Mélanie?
So, of course, we're extremely preoccupied with the growing tensions in the regions, and I had numerous conversations with Annalena, but also with Tony Blinken a couple of days ago about this. And there's a statement that I don't know whether at this point it's published or not, but it should be very soon. So it is, okay, about our position as G7 countries regarding what's going on in Taiwan. So we know that what China is doing is clearly threatening, and they're using not only threatening actions, but they're using as well economic coercion, which is a really big problem. So, as Annalena mentioned, Mrs. Pelosi's visit cannot be used as a pretext, a justification for China to become even more assertive against Taiwan, because we think that more they do so, more they have an escalatory approach, well, more it's rising tensions, and it can really destabilize the region. So that's why we're extremely concerned. That's why also we're working within the G7 as a coalition But also, I think that we need to continue to engage with Taiwan. We need to be there to support their democracy. We need to make sure also that we engage with them. That's what we're doing economically speaking, because we're negotiating with Taiwan directly an agreement on economic partnership. But meanwhile, our position regarding China as a policy has not changed.
Well, time has passed. From a business organization perspective, clearly, you mentioned something. We want to increase the economic relations between friends, between economies that are based on rights and where the rule of law stands. Clearly, from our chamber perspective, we will bring more companies to Hannover Messe and to Germany, and I'll visit the zoo, I promise. But at the end of the day, it'll be important for us to have a clear view of the diplomacy and the hard power situation. Business people can be vulnerable, and we will need to understand the risk we're taking so that we make the right choices. So I thank you very much for this conversation and for coming to Montreal. Et merci beaucoup, Madame Joly.
Merci, Michel. Merci à tous. Thank you so much. Merci. Thank you, Annalena.
C'est ce qui clôt le déjeuner causerie d'aujourd'hui. Merci à tous d'avoir été des nôtres et on se retrouve pour le début officiel de la saison des événements de la Chambre en septembre. Merci, bonne journée.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Beaucoup. Toi, tu aimé ça? Oui. J'ai beaucoup aimé ça, moi. C'était très, c'est ça. Ça montre votre relation. Oui. Ça vous semblait.